push got it there.
And here we go.
Okay.
So I would like to welcome everyone. It is 7 o'clock on the dot, and we are on Facebook Live, ATAP EDU. You are just a tap away from discovering the genius in your child. And we are going to, there we go. So I am here with the lovely Miss Kim,
Hello.
and and I am so excited that I can barely keep all my thoughts together and all my words from just spilling out in a big tumbled up mess so that nobody understands. I oh, I'm just so excited. Want to share with you all. Um, where is my? There we go. So oh my, there we go. So um, I'm with ATAP EDU, the Center for Learning at Genius, and I have my master's degree in education. My story is that I was, you know, was in a small school, class of 80, and I wasn't the top student, and I wasn't the lowest student. I was always about 20th. And schooling was always a lot of work for me. It took a lot for me to get the grades that I got. But what's interesting is that the farther I got up in my education, the higher that my grades got. So in other words, the more I was closer to discovering who I was and what my gifts were and what I was going to do with my life, and the more focused I was, then the better my grades were. And have you ever just gotten a bad report or had someone or been falsely accused? And my my story is, here I am. I'm not a bad student. I'm not a great student. I'm just, kind of average. But at an early age in junior high, I felt a real strong calling to work with children with special needs, and I volunteered at an orphanage. At that time, they called it for the severely and profoundly retarded, and it was there that I taught my first student to read. An impossible thing, especially for a junior high student that had, no teaching, no education, especially with a population that was determined to not have that potential. And I think the what I discovered about myself, and what is that there's some things that are true and that fit and that I receive, and then there's some things that aren't true that I that don't fit and I don't receive. And the I remember sitting in my, so here I had uh, was in junior high school, got a learner's permit, got permission to go to to work at this orphanage, and and then I volunteered my senior year. I was a first grade assistant, and I got a scholarship to go into education. And yet the brilliant conversation that I had with my guidance counselor after doing my aptitude test is that there was nowhere that I really fit. The best fit for me and the best job and best career potential for me was to work in a factory. Because I was a 3D thinker, because I could see things, and my motor skills were where I could put the pieces together. And I think it's really interesting. And here's just a quick, you can go to my website, www.atap-edu.com, and see my credentials, my awards. I was a Golden Apple. I received the Golden Apple Teacher Award in San Diego, um, and um, I've worked with some great doctors, even though my potential was just to be. And there's nothing wrong with being a factory worker. There's no shame. There's no. I mean, it's just that that didn't fit. That didn't fit. My ability to see the pieces and put the pieces together was also translated to my ability to be able to grade papers upside down. Like there, just because there's not a definition or where a place where someone else determines whether you belong or not, doesn't mean that's it. That's the end. You take that advice and you go home and do your thing, because we have gifts, we have talents, we have skills to develop, and we really have to follow our passions. Um, and What's kind of exciting with my story, and what I've experienced with children is, I ran across this study by Dr. Land and Jarman. They were called into NASA. They needed to find out if there was a test or some way to assess criteria so that they could hire the most gifted in NASA in our space program. And the test that they developed was so simple and yet so complete that it opened up the doors for more questions. And their questions were, well, okay, if we can determine that these kinds of brains are the best to go into space and to invent and create and innovate, is that something that's learned, or is that something that they were just born with? And so then they took that test into the schools, and they looked at uh, 4 to 5 year olds, and when they gave them that test at that age, 98% of them were in that gifted, creative genius range. They took the same group of kids 10 years at 10 years old, and only 30% of those same kids tested at that genius and that creative range. And then at 15 years, same test, same group of 1,600 kids, only 12% of them tested at that creative genius range. Then they were so discouraged by their findings that they didn't want to go back to those same 1,600 kids, and they just did a random poll of 1 million adults that were 31 years old, and only 2% of them tested in that gifted genius range. And as a result, um, the they hire on purpose. NASA hires 50% adults that have been tested and diagnosed with dyslexia. Why? Because people with dyslexia, let me pull out of the share for a second so you can see my little letter. So here, when we get into the classroom, when we get into formal education in a traditional setting, this could be whatever or nothing. But to a child that sees in 3D, when we are originally learning, okay, this is a jar. No matter how I turn it, its object permanence, it's always a jar. And we learn through our five senses. As small children, we're constantly collecting data, we're sorting it and organizing it into our memory. And then all of a sudden, we go from a 3D world where we're sorting and organizing and learning about the world and our place in the world, to flat two-dimensional, where this can only be a Q, and this can only be a D, and this can only be a B. And that traditional classroom, what Dr. Land, you can look up his TED Talk. What they're working on now is that he said, every single country can copy our research. We basically use that same research in as we came out of the farming society and into the industrial age. Um, we wanted to multiply. We wanted to copy and duplicate. So how, and they were looking for factory workers. So how can we copy? How can we duplicate? How can we train up good factory workers? And so that's how the public education system was set up. And which is interesting then in my aptitude test that I was to be, a factory worker. I was the perfect, I was their perfect little guinea pig. But what Dr. Land was saying is that, all these countries have copied that research and they can now duplicate and put out, factory workers, but we've fallen behind. Where is the creativity? Where are the innovators? Where are the new ideas? Where are the problems to solve? And how are they getting solved? Well, people with dyslexia, people that can see in 3D, your engineers, your scientists, your mathematicians, your artists, your your all of the performing arts, your athletes, they have this gift, this innate ability to interpret and see a problem and solve a problem before the world even knows that there was a problem. So all of your top CEOs, all of your top brains in the world are running those businesses because they saw a problem and they solved the problem before anyone even knew there was a problem. And the only problem with seeing in 3D is in the traditional classroom, and if it impedes or impairs the reading process. So it's really critical that we anchor in the directions of the letters for our kids that are 3D thinkers at an early age, and teach them, okay, there's only one way. There's only one way. This is always going to be a B. If it's turned a little bit to the side, it's nothing. If it's flipped, it's a D. If it's, so that they can sort through and organize that. And then once that is anchored in, then they can create. Then they can innovate. Then they can do. If you put that creative, innovative 3D thinker who NASA defined as being gifted in problem solving, gifted in 3D thinking, and gifted in spatial orientation. Like I said, seeing things in space. If you put them in a two-dimensional world and and they compare themselves to the child sitting next to them, it completely deflates them and pulls away from their identity, and they're thinking, well, there's something wrong with me because I'm not thinking like the person next to me. And maybe they're in motion, or maybe who knows what they're going to create, who knows what problems they're going to solve. Right now we're in a place where this next generation is seeing and solving problems that haven't even come into our imaginations yet. And so I feel like our role as teachers is shifting to help children discover who they are and then train up their skills, but without taking away their identity, without taking away their gifts, and without taking away what they were, the things that they're going to solve and the problems that they're going to provide solutions for. And I'm super excited. Now I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Kim, if you could say your full name and give an introduction to yourself. But why I'm so excited is because she is running an alternative, and I'll let you. I won't say anymore. I'll let you take over from here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, my name is Kimberly Frassett, and I have been teaching or taking art lessons for over 50 years. and I have developed a curriculum that can teach anyone how to draw. And I totally agree with all that you said. I was labeled with dyslexia myself before it had a name, and I was punished for doing my letters backwards. And I would say to my parents, a chair is a chair, no matter which way you turn it. Why is a B or D wrong if I do it this way? And they couldn't see what I was meaning by that. But I started painting and drawing at 6, as soon as I had the small motor skills, and started taking oil painting lessons at 12, and teaching my method of drawing when I had children. So I took the things that I was learning in college and adapted them for my children and homeschooled them. And other of my friends started sending their kids to my house, and pretty soon I had 350 kids a week I was seeing, not in my house anymore. We had to move to a different location, and now we have over 560 a week at our school called Terra Arts in Westminster, California. I have a little PowerPoint presentation. Can I switch to that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm going to push share screen, desktop, share. So this is me. TerraArts.org is our school, and Kimberly Frassett, Arita Press is the curriculum that I've written, a real education through art. It's project-based learning, so every student in our school writes and illustrates a book, and that book has in it history, writing, drawing, geography, literature, and timeline dates. And as they write and illustrate their own book, they are learning the specific time in history. This year we're doing early American colonial history. And so we're going from the Vikings discovering America to the Civil War. But most people who are educators feel comfortable teaching all of those other things, but the drawing, I'm going to focus on the drawing so that we can learn something new here today. This is how to draw, how I've discovered to draw. When you're learning to read, you are actually learning only 5 easy shapes. And those shapes are dots, here's a dot, circles, curvy lines, straight lines, and angle lines. If you could draw those 5 shapes, you can draw anything. You're learning a language when you're learning to read, and you're learning a visual literacy when you're learning how to draw. And what I do with the kids is I sound out the shapes in a drawing as we are drawing it, the same as you would sound out the letters when you are teaching a child to read. You wouldn't just give a child an encyclopedia and say, here you go, 6-year-old, let's see if you can read it. And when they aren't able to do that, you say, oh, it's all right, we'll find something else you're good at. But that's what we do with art. We give them very advanced things to draw and know step by step, sounding out the drawings to show them how to do it. So what I'll do is, and I have 15 teachers who are working under me now, and they take the shapes one line at a time, one dot at a time, one curvy line, and they draw it on the board so the kids can see it and the kids follow along. And as they grow and as they mature, they just get better at it until they can do it on their own. So I'm going to use my grandson as an example. Here he is at 6, and he's never taken any art classes with us. And we started with the ancient experience, ancient history, so that he's starting at the beginning of the world. And we studied the cave paintings. So we're using a historical references, primary sources. And he drew this beast over here on his, with pastels. We tried to use the same kind of materials that they would have used in ancient times. And then he narrated a story. So he was hearing stories read to him. He narrated the story back to his mother, copied it. She copied it down and put it into a book. So now he's got his narration, his artwork for his illustration. Then he did a map of the area, and we glued it together in the book like a timeline. So this was the very first week. And then as the weeks went by, here he's doing Egyptian hieroglyphs. And we did not draw on any of the students' artwork. And he's starting to get the easy shapes. You can see the shapes in here. The circles, straight lines, and we're looking at primary sources all along to be inspired by real history. Here's Gilgamesh, and we read the story of Gilgamesh and talked about it, and then did a map, his narration, but I'm just going to show you the art. Here's the sun god of the ancient Aztecs. Here's Cleopatra. You can tell he's getting a little better. He's still only in first grade. Here's the Colosseum, his shapes. He's getting more small muscle control. And here, by the end of the year, is his self-portrait. He's 6 years old still, doing this self-portrait. And then here's his portrait of Justinian at the very end of the year. And then I'm just going to skip up to his grade level now. Now he's in third grade. And here he is. And his first project of the year, we were doing Aztec art. And he's got his lion. And then here is the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. And he's learning more techniques now, like how to make things look in perspective, how to make them look like they're going in distance, how to use color. And each person that they're studying, Marco Polo, John Wycliffe, we looked at portraits of these people. He's got a white beard, of course, Wycliffe does, so he left it white. And they're just gaining more and more techniques as they go along. So I'm going to go to some other kids in our school. Here, we're doing George Washington, and we use the 5 easy shapes with these children, and they painted him in watercolor. And here's some of the, these are first and second graders doing these great portraits of George Washington. And if you look at it carefully, you can see there's a dot, there's a curvy line, there's a straight line, another curvy line. This line curves down like a J. It goes into a curve. And so we spelled it out just like reading. This shadow is like an angle line, and it's got cross hatching in it. So we were teaching them here about cross hatching. And here's some more. They're all able to do it. I've never had a single student who was not able to draw, as long as they're also able to read. It's the same kind of skill. Along with teaching them, I teach them not to compare their work to others, because you don't know how long someone else has been practicing or where they started. Maybe this is your first week and you're already in 3rd or 4th grade, and you are going to have to take some time to catch up with the other kids who started younger than you. Or you might have your own style. None of us are copy machines. Our own style is going to come out in our artwork. I myself have had 50 years of practice, and so I can draw something like this. And that's what 50 years of practice will do for you. So you just have to keep practicing. And so this drawing of my other grandchildren involves a lot of other techniques, shading. This is just in pencil. And so these are the way that we teach them to draw. And then a very important thing that I really emphasize, and that we should all emphasize in any art situation, or even in just in life, I tell them that the most important art lesson I ever received was I was drawing at the cliffs in Corona del Mar, and I was drawing and painting, and the president of Laguna College of Art and Design came up behind me, and he said, "Your art, you would really benefit from having this art teacher, John Brosio, come and teach you. And he's really expensive, but he will really help you." And he didn't give me any other critique other than that. He just said, "Call John." And so I did call John, and he cost $100 an hour, and he had a 3-hour minimum. And I bit the bullet and I paid for it. And he came and he watched me paint for 3 hours without saying a thing. And I was all distressed by the end of the 3 hours that I had wasted my money. And at the end of the 3 hours, he said, "I watched you. You never really looked at the ocean. The ocean you've got is not the same color as the ocean that you're painting there. Here's one of mine. These rocks are not that color. That water is not that color. You're not looking. You're using your imagination. Sure, it's delightful, but looking is what you need to do." And so together, he then spent another 3 hours with me and showed me how to look. So looking is the most important part of drawing and painting, spending the time looking, which leads me to something I wanted to share with your people, because many times we get to go to art museums and we don't know what to do with our time there. And I wanted to give you a quick tip on what to do in an art museum. Go to the guard as you walk in the door and say, "What is the most popular thing here? I want to see it first." And then go straight to that most popular thing. I was pleasantly surprised when I went to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. to find a Leonardo da Vinci there. And I had been to the Louvre and saw the Mona Lisa, and there were so many people crowded around, you couldn't even get close to it. And there in the Smithsonian was another Leonardo da Vinci, just as beautiful, with no one around it. And I got to get right up to it and enjoy it as the first thing that I looked at when I got there, when I wasn't tired. And so my first tip is what to do in an art museum. Ask the guard. Rest and rest while you're there. When you look at art with your kids, my students have got a timeline in their head because of starting with ancient history. One year we do ancient, then we do Middle Ages, then the third year we do the American colonial, then we do the Age of Discovery, and then the modern world. And so they can look at a piece of artwork like this and know that it belongs in the ancient world. And so that's what you talk about when you see the art. This sculpture was in the very same room. This is not the ancient world. And they would know that this is a sculpture from the modern world. And then you're going to see paintings that you've made copies of if you're following this. And so you would know as soon as you saw that without looking at the label that that's a Monet, because you've made copies of the Monet at home, and that this is a Van Gogh. And so the time that you spend at home preparing, and if you went to this art museum, this is the Honolulu Art Museum, and only saw those 4 things, that would be worth the whole trip to Hawaii because it is so rare to find these beautiful pieces of artwork anywhere. And if you are already familiar with them from your reading and studying, then you will enjoy and have it will be much more fulfilling than looking at every single thing in the art museum. They've done studies on people in art museums, and they average 15 seconds per piece of artwork. And that's just not enough time to really look at it. So I want to show you what I do in an art museum and what you can do also with your kids or with yourself. I go and I find my most favorite thing in the museum. So this was in the Honolulu Museum, and it's a painting by John Singer Sargent. I was so excited to see her that I called one of my friends at home and said, "There's a Sargent here." And he was like, no way they could have sergeants in Honolulu, but they do. And so I went to the store, the museum store, and I bought a sketch pad and some pastel pencils, and I drew her. And the reason that I do this is because then I was forced to spend 20 minutes looking. And the reason I look so carefully is because then I could look at her hand carefully and I could draw her hand, because then when I do my own paintings, and this is one of my own paintings, I will have been taught by John Singer Sargent how to do hands. And so when I do my hands, they will look like John Singer Sargent's hands, as though I'm being taught by a great master how to do my artwork. So instead of having a mediocre art teacher, I've got the best teacher of all. And so this is one of my own. And then here's another one with hands that I did, and another with hands that I did. And I learned to do this one when I went to Germany, and I saw a painting by Rubens called Returning Hero Crowned with Glory. And they just happened to have a couch right in front of it. And I sat there and I drew the whole thing. And maybe 2 hours I spent with that Rubens drawing. And when I came home, I was inspired to do this portrait of a friend of mine called by the same name, Returning Hero Crowned with Glory, where a friend of mine was in Iraq, and his job there in the Navy was detonating bombs. And this is him coming back to America to his new baby. And here the door is red, white, and blue. He's back at home, but outside the door for him is still Iraq. And that was quite true for him. And so that is what I wanted to share with you: how to draw, how to look, and what to do in an art museum. And I hope that's helpful for you and for your listeners.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to stop sharing now so you can have the screen back.
There we go.
There we go.
So I have some questions. You had shared with me on the phone about how you set up your school, and explain to me like how you sort your kids, how do you organize your kids, and how because don't you have science at
Yes.
your school?
Yes,
So
we
how do you do
Uh-huh.
that?
Well, when we're doing the ancient world, we well, I'll start from the beginning. We have 125 kids that come per day. The kindergartners have their own program with 2 teachers, 15 students, and they do all the subjects at their level. But we tried to bring them into the rotation, but they kept getting lost. So it was too much for them. So 1st through 8th grade is divided into 6 classrooms. One is PE, outdoors. So the 5 classrooms are art with geography, history with art, fine arts, science with art, and the creative writing class. So the 5 classes, and they rotate around from classroom to classroom, all the 1st graders together, 2nd graders together. And because those teachers are specialists in their field, so they're not a specialist 1st graders, they're a specialist in science. And so they will do projects, the kind of projects that parents won't want to do at home, all hands-on learning things, messy things that apply to the time period that we're studying. So say we're doing Abraham Lincoln and we're doing the Civil War, they might be, they are going to be drawing a portrait of Abraham Lincoln in the history with art class. And then the fine arts class, they're going to be learning how to do photography, because photography was invented at that time period, how to make photos. And then in the science class, she's going to be talking about how they develop photos. And they're going to practice doing it in the classroom because 1860s was the first photography of war scenes. And then the geography class will do a map of all the battles on a big map that they're preparing. And the writing class will write a story that will go in their book. So all in one day, in 6 classes, well, the outdoor class will play games that kids would have played during that time period. In one day, in 6 classes, they've covered, we call it the American experience, because they're experiencing all of those things in one day. They're living it out. And we pay them for doing their homework. So they can earn colonial bucks if they come with their written and corrected essay, if they dress in costume, if they have a colonial lunch in a basket. And so they're participating more fully. And then we have a little store with the parents have donated things that they can buy with their colonial bucks, so that they're not getting any grades, because we're not a real school. We're a learning center. And so we are not under any obligation to grade anyone. And we just want to teach them real world economics. If you do your work, you get paid, right? And you don't do your work, you don't get paid. You don't get to go shopping in the store if you didn't do your work. Simple as that. And so we have about 125 kids per day that participate. We just started junior high because we were only going up to 6th grade last year, but our 6th graders did not want to leave. And so we have a small junior high program, and they are also learning Latin and doing adding theater to their day, so that they can perform things like Patrick Henry's great speech on liberty or something like that, or dramatic debate, things like more performing skills. So that's the way that we do it.
Wow. So now you had shared with me, well, I have one huge question from the other day. So you said that by the end, your goal is for them to have written and illustrated their own book.
Right.
And so now, is that a published book, or is that
No, it's not published. Here's one of the books. Sorry, here's one. And so this is an ancient history book, the 1st grade book from my grandson. And so it's full of all of his work that he did, his artwork, his writing, his maps. And so it's not published, but they get to show it to all their family.
well, and it's a portfolio.
Yes, it is a portfolio. And the reason that I settled on this is because when I was homeschooling my own kids, which is 30 years ago, I was one of the first homeschoolers, and I had to present proof to my family that we were actually doing something. And actually I had to present proof everywhere I went, even to the library on a school day, that we were not playing hooky or delinquents. And so I came up with this idea many years ago to make a portfolio, and the accomplishment that they feel that they have written and illustrated a book, whether it's published or not, they're not quite there yet. But the older kids are working on making a published book where they want to take the junior high kids, they want to take their best stories and see if they can put them into some kind of book and sell it on Amazon. And they're just toying with that idea, but I hope to get there eventually.
No, I think it's brilliant, and I love it, and I love that it's it's basically the fruit of what Dr. Land was saying, in that we've the traditional classroom has taken out the genius, has
Mhm.
taken out the creativity. It's taken our entire 3D world and even, even deeper than that when you're talking about eh, uh, interacting and experiencing and going through the feelings and the emotions of the artist. It goes into even another dimension of empathy and sympathy and character and character development. But when you take that out and you just make everything flat and two-dimensional, when
Right.
when you read, I tested a student once. Um, I tested him and he was at an above grade level and they didn't need my services anymore. There were a few areas that I'm like, oh, he could do more, but you know, uh, I I leave the graduation in the hands of the child and the parent and the child, and so they were done. And then a couple years later, they came back, and and he was struggling in a traditional classroom. And when I did auditory processing, I was measuring how he processed new information, how it was stored, and how it was, and how he was able to pull the information out. And and I noticed his attention span was extremely short. And so we started timing, Mom and I started timing him. And it was, I mean, like it was seconds and milliseconds, his attention span.
Mhm.
And so then I started asking him the important questions. Well, what's going on? What's your favorite class? Why do you like that class? What are they doing in that class? How is that teacher teaching? How does that match how you learn? Because when my kids go through that process and they know how they think and learn, unfortunately, in a perfect world, teachers would teach the way that children learn. But in the real world, teachers teach the way that they learn, and that hits a good percent of the population. But if you don't learn the way that teacher learns, then you know then there's this conflict. And so what I do is I train my students to figure out how that teacher learns and teaches, and then adapt with their strengths. And um and so he, so I could have that conversation with him. And so I'm asking him those questions, and his least favorite class was history. And I just thought about it because I also knew that this child had his own, when they lived on a farm, he had his own barn, and he had his own inventions.
Mhm.
And it wasn't a little deal. Dad also and there were things under patent that Dad would be like, okay, son, now remember, we don't share about this because it was it was real.
Mhm.
It was real, and these are super cool inventions. And so I'm getting this 3D picture of him in elementary school, learning around the holidays the same exact history with a little bit more information every year.
Uh-huh.
And how incredibly boring is that? And
Yep.
he's so gifted and he's so bright that if it's old, he's thinking about something else. If it's new, he's thinking about something else. He's like, oh wow, that new idea I could put with this new idea, I could invent this, I could do this. I wonder what that person was thinking. I wonder what they were feeling, because he's such a 3D thinker. He's so connected to everything, to his world.
Uh-huh.
Well, if you keep him in a traditional classroom where he's not able to think the way he thinks and learn the way that he learns, what happens to his inventions? Now,
Mhm.
some people can adapt and can still and they can jump through the hoops and they can do the thing to get what they need to graduate, so that then they can, you know, then they can invent their things and do their things. And some kids need, like you've done with art, they need a roadmap. They need specific directions.
Mhm.
With your reading analogy and art, I use the same analogy for kids that are struggling to read,
Uh-huh.
is that it's not it's it what's happening is that the kids that pick it up naturally are jumping through a jump over and through a bunch of steps. And the child that's struggling isn't really struggling. They're just needing the roadmap. They're just needing step by step by step.
Right. Right. That's true.
And if
Mhm.
you can go back and teach them each of those steps, just like you found with art.
Mhm.
I did my first Camp Genius, and I was like the miracle worker because I went back and I taught those basic shapes that you
Uh-huh.
were talking about.
Uh-huh.
And if they couldn't do it, then I talk them through it. And if they couldn't do that, then I hand over hand, and they just jumped developmentally in their eye-hand coordination and in their writing, and which automatically jumped to their spelling.
Mhm.
And all I did was went back and taught what they weren't taught, which those things that were skipped for them.
Right. I tell them that reading is actually much harder than drawing because there's 5 shapes for drawing and there's 26 letters for reading with 70 different sounds and all the phonics. And so we're going to have no problem with drawing. Drawing's going to happen in one day, and they believe me. So
Well, and
it's
there are other languages that just have one symbol for one sound.
mhm.
And they don't have the dyslexic and the, you know what I mean? They don't have those kinds of issues because we're a melting pot, and there's, the dictionary committee that decides what words and how things are spelt. And if we spell it wrong long enough, and the dictionary committee says, okay, that's how we're going to spell this word now, then that's how we spell this word now.
Uh-huh.
There's no absolutes.
Right. Daniel Webster got us all in trouble, spelling
Yep, yep.
trouble.
And I remember saying that to one of my students that was in musical theater. And she, had started like at a really low grade level in reading. And then in a short period of time, when I went back and taught the fundamentals and put it together for her, she jumped up and did extremely well, 80s and 90s in her college entrance exams. But the only thing that she struggled a little bit with was it was fluid reading fluency,
Uh-huh.
which would show up in her auditions. And I told her, I said, keep that dyslexia diagnosis in your back pocket for when you need it, you
Uh-huh.
know, but no one's going to care. Because when you get into the melting pot, the college, from people from all over the world and all over the United States, we say things differently from different parts of the country. So do your performance, learn your lines, don't worry about the words, and wait for the director to say, hey, I'd like you to pronounce that word this way.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was very interesting you talking about NASA because my father was an engineer on the space program and he was on the Apollo and Gemini missions and stayed with the space program all the way to the Star Wars technology during the space race
Wow.
and the the Cold War. He was very instrumental in the Cold War in bringing down the Berlin Wall. And
Wow.
he designated me from age 10 or 11 as his helper in the garage every weekend. And so my other brother and sister had to help my mom in the house clean. And I had to help him in the garage, change the oil in the car, do all of the interesting projects that he was making. I loved it in the garage. I was the happiest kid on the planet to be working with him, learning how to change the tire on the bicycle or, doing all those 3D kind of things. And I credit a lot of my success to him because he was teaching me how to be creative by doing those things, because he would seldom say, this is how you get to the end of the problem. I would say, how do I get from here to there? And he'd go, with great difficulty. I just have to figure it out. He bailed me out, of course, but I wouldn't, I learned a lot of creativity from him in making projects, painting the trailer on the boat, finding the fishing lures, getting ready for vacation, things like that were
Well, and how
practical
many
hands-on.
times did you not have the exact thing you needed and then problem solved and watched your father problem solve and
Uh-huh.
create the thing or adapt the thing to make it work?
Absolutely. Right now, my shelf in my refrigerator is being held up with chopsticks. So, but it's been like that for a year, so I think it's worked. But it's yeah, it's I learned a lot from him, being creative, doing hands-on projects, making things, coming to the end of a project with a sense of accomplishment, and it's it's worth. This summer, I got to teach art, watercolor on a cruise ship, and got 6 free cruises this summer. And I told all the kids that, the skills you're learning here with watercolor are really valuable because this is how much the cruise cost. And I got it for free because I know how to teach watercolor. So what you're learning here, really pay attention to me and learn it so you can make money. And they really got their attention because money is a great motivator. And it should be. That's how real life is.
Well,
So,
I am so thrilled that we got to share tonight. I will take our response from Facebook Live and from my interactions and send you some questions that we can hit tomorrow. If you
okay.
could share with your students and your families that we'll be back here
Okay.
same time tomorrow. It's 5 o'clock your time on the Pacific Coast,
Yes.
7 o'clock my time in the Central. In the center of the United States, Central Standard Time, and we will dive deeper, I think, into all the things. I think especially that creativity and innovative and giving the kids space, giving them the skills, so it's not just empty space, but giving them the skills and then giving them the space to be creative and to innovate, and what happens in the brain, when we do that. And I was also thinking, wouldn't it be super cool? I wrote a book. I'm okay now. You're an artist, so this is my
I
interpretation
won't
of the
be crit-
world.
I won't be critical.
Thank you, thank you. So, it's the 7 keys to reading readiness. It's teaching all of those developmental skills needed
Mhm.
to be successful in the classroom.
Oh,
And I have a section on creativity and innovation, and
mhm.
that and having that space. And I thought, well, what if you and I partnered together someday and did like a little after school creativity thing? I have that section in my book, so I'd like to share a little bit of that tomorrow.
Okay.
And maybe we could brainstorm and put something together. It's super powerful. We've been talking about in my last 3 months about music and what happens neurologically with music in the brain,
Mhm.
and how it gives, if we're learning through our 5 senses and everything's getting organized and sorted in our memory, and some things, if you have a child that's in a traditional classroom setting and things aren't clicking, things aren't hanging in that memory and sticking into their long-term memory, you
Mhm.
know um what you're doing is powerful.
Mhm.
it
What
it
when you're drawing, it's like meditating. You're in a meditative state in your brain, and it's actually healing your brain. Drawing, the act of drawing, and we can talk about that tomorrow.
Yes, let's do. So I would just like to to close off today, thanking you so much for your time. And I'm super excited about tomorrow. And for those of you, friends and family, and future friends and family from ATAP EDU, and from the name of your uh,
Terra Arts.
Terra Arts, we'd like to thank you for your time, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye bye.
Bye.